It's a pleasure for me to be here with you all at this very important moment of Mexico's history. And I believe the future is shaped by defending the best of what we have inherited. And you are in an extremely unique position to have received and then given to the world the legacy of all this amazing diversity of corn. Thousands and thousands of years of creative work by nature, by farmers, by women. And yet, we have some companies, like Monsanto, which suffer a kind of an illusion. They really think they are the creators. And we often joke and say, GMO means God move over, evolution move over, peasants move over, now we're going to take over. And they can't do this without deceit, without corruption, without lies. That is for me, why for me, the defense of the seed is the defense of truth. It's the defense of freedom. Now I recognize some of you from Cancun, where you might remember Monsanto had organized a gifting of GMO foods when it was totally illegal to a poor community outside Cancun. And we heard about it, and people went and informed the community what GMOs were. And the poorest of people said, we don't want this stuff. They started to return the boxes of Kellogg's cornflakes and everything else. Now, I started fighting GMOs when I first realized that this was going to be the strategy of the takeover of our food and health system. 1987. A conference was organized in outside Geneva. United Nations was involved, its industry was involved. And they said they had to do genetic engineering because it was the only way they could take patents. Only way by adding a toxic gene to a plant. They could say, we've created this plant. But of course, adding a toxic gene to corn does not create the 10,000 years of history, nor does it create the next 10,000 years of evolution and potential. All it does is add a toxic. Now, instead of these companies being rewarded with exclusive rights, intellectual property rights, they should have been sued immediately for contamination of the food. Because contamination is not only when a GMO, a gene moves to a non-GM crop. The GMO itself is a contaminated crop, it's a contaminated food. Genes of Bt, Bacillus thuringiensis, don't belong to the corn. Genes of Roundup resistance, for Roundup resistance don't belong to our crops. Of course, Monsanto was very clever. They and the other chemical companies which came out of the war, and having sold chemicals for the war, they knew how to manipulate, they knew how to lie, they knew how to create emergency. And first they brought those chemicals into agriculture, and just recently there's been an explosion in a fertilizer factory in the US and Texas, because fertilizer factories came from explosive factories. It wasn't an accident, it's the original design. That is why Bhopal disaster in '84 took place. It wasn't an accident. These pesticides are designed to kill people. And then, after having taken over agriculture through chemicals, and in Mexico and India are the two places where a toxic agriculture was spread in the name of the Green Revolution. Here through cement, and in India through Erie. I won't talk too much about the Green Revolution, but those who brought the toxics into farming now want to take over the seed. That's their agenda. GMOs are the excuse to take over. Because how can they come and tell a peasant this is my invention? No, they can't. So they have to manipulate and add a new gene to say, I've done this. It's a bit like, I come in with all these books and reports of ours, come into your beautiful and grand and giant university. I haven't seen a university so big anywhere. And if I come in and say, see, I brought a few books, and therefore I'm the creator of this building and all of the university. And now not only should the university pay me rents, all of your fees should come to me. It's a ridiculous concept, but we have accepted that ridiculous concept when it comes to life itself. One toxic gene has given ownership. And Monsanto has gone on record, James Enyart, their representative, immediately after the WTO, the World Trade Organization, was formed, they said the trade-related intellectual property rights agreement. Why is it such a mouthful? Just to cheat. They should just have said owning life, owning seed, but then everyone would have rebelled. So they said trade-related intellectual property rights. All it says is governments must force patenting on life forms, on transgenics. It begins with transgenics, but it doesn't end with there. Now they're taking patents on non-transgenic crops. The most important issue is, James Enyart said, in writing this agreement, we achieved something unprecedented. We defined a problem and offered a solution. We were the patient, diagnostician, physician, all in one. The problem, they said, was farmers save seeds. That's a problem for them. And the solution was use intellectual property law to make it illegal for farmers to have their own seeds. That's what transgenic crops are all about. Creating a monopoly, collecting a royalty. But it is not just about creating a royalty, it's also about a deep sense of control. In my view, it comes from a deep fear. Comes from the fear of anything that is free and alive. So you must take away the freedom and destroy the life. It's the kind of fear that leads to violence against women. Why do men have to go around killing women or raping them? Because of their fear of the freedom and sovereignty and integrity of the woman as an independent being, a person in her own right. She has to be property. She has to be subjugated. She has to be made an object. That same thinking is behind what Monsanto is doing. I call them global rapists of our cultures and our ecosystems. And I don't use this word loosely because I take rape very seriously as a deep violence. But anytime there is violation against the earth or against our crops in their centers of diversity or against the freedom of people, it is a rape. Because it takes away the integrity, it destroys the integrity. If you look at it, why are the Monsantos of the world so desperate to introduce transgenic crops in their centers of diversity? Because that is where the freedom of nature is expressed. To bring forth thousands of varieties of corn. In India, 1,000 varieties, 1,500 varieties of cotton. 4,500 varieties of the eggplant. So they began with transgenic cotton in '98, illegally. I had to sue them. They couldn't commercially sell till 2002. But since Monsanto entered the Indian seed market with cotton, 1995, they did three things. First, they started to buy up Indian companies or have partnerships with them. Second, they started to corrupt our government. Third, they started to change the laws. As a result of which, we now have in the land which had 1,500 varieties of cotton, in the land where Gandhi, called the father of our freedom movement, said, I will not fight the British. with their own means. There's a very famous feminist who has said you can't break the master's house with the master's tools. And he said, we will spin our freedom. Because at that time, just like in today's world, transgenics and the food system is where imperialism is being born. At that time, imperialism rested on the textile industry. One part of it was to force people to grow cotton and indigo, that's what they were doing in India. The other was to capture slaves in Africa, transport them to North America to make them grow cotton, and then all of this went to England, to the factories, and sold as finished goods to countries which made the most beautiful fabrics, including my own. And they began with very thought-out strategies. There was a very famous governor called Macaulay, and he said, the only way we can take over India is by convincing Indians that everything that they have is inferior, and everything we bring is superior. This is cultural colonization. That's exactly what Monsanto is doing today. Your seeds are primitive, your seeds are inferior. The GMO is superior. This is a racism of the worst kind. Especially when what they bring has no value, no worth, nobody wants it. The only way they can push GMO seeds is by taking away the freedom of farmers and by taking away the freedom of consumers to not know what they are eating. In US, there's a big battle about labeling. The land with the biggest democracy, citizens don't have the freedom to know what they eat. They don't have the freedom to have that little piece of labeling which most countries of the world have already adopted. So you can see that transgenic crops cannot go hand in hand with freedom. Or you can say they go hand in hand with the freedom of Monsanto to destroy all biodiversity, to destroy and contaminate our food system, and to destroy our democracies. Let me give you an example of what Monsanto did to India, the land where cotton was the fiber of freedom for our independence. As I mentioned, they came in 98 with the transgenics, but they came in with the genes earlier in 1995. Today, 95% of the cotton seed sold in India is owned and controlled by Monsanto. Every year, $200 million of royalty payments flow from very, very poor peasants to St. Louis, the headquarters of Monsanto. How do the peasants pay? They don't have the money. They do it on credit. Why do they do it on credit? Because they're convinced, using all kinds of messages, including all our sacred texts, including all our divinities and saints and gods. And you know, in India, because we think divinity is in all of life, and we know there are 300 million species in the world, we have 300 million divinities. Every glass, every, the tulsi, you touch anything, it is sacred. Our rivers, and each divinity, besides being a form of nature, also has an icon. And so what they do is pull off these icons in this amazing culture and use them to sell the transgenic. And they have so much money, they can send video vans to every village, the remotest corner. Farmers who never had to deal with corruption of this kind really believe the God is telling me buy the seed. And then it fails, so they buy more. They think they're buying a different seed because 60 Indian companies are locked into licensing arrangements to not sell anything but Monsanto's BT cotton. They're seed breeders, they've had other seeds, but they're not allowed to sell anything else. And now that the BT cotton has failed, they're now selling what is called the Bolgat 2, the 2 stacks. And those companies can't sell anything else except the second generation. The costs of seed jumped 8,000%. Seed that Monsanto sells is non-renewable. Those peasants got into deep debt, but also a deep debt when they were expecting to become prosperous. And on the day when the agents of the seed company, who are the ones who push the seeds and the chemicals, and get the peasants to sign on a piece of paper to say, I'll settle this credit and I'll mortgage my land. It's when the creditors come to take the land. The farmer goes to the field quietly, drinks a bottle of pesticide, ends his life, and somebody finds the body and comes and tells the widow, your husband is lying dead in the farm. Why does he go to the field? Because his land, the mother, is being alienated. Maybe 30 generations, 40 generations of farming on that piece of land. 270,000 Indian peasants have committed suicide since Monsanto took over the cotton seed supply. Majority of these suicides are in the cotton areas, and the suicides started in the cotton areas. So one can say it is a genocide, because according to the United Nations, any deliberate harm caused to any group of people is a genocide. Now, most of the time we associate genocide with ethnicity, like what happened in Rwanda, like what happens in other parts of the world. But farmers are a group. They're an economic group. They are the givers of our food. And there is a deliberate targeting to destroy the independent farmer and the independent peasant of the world. That's the fear. Now, before we had GATT, I used to organize a lot of meetings, big protests, 500,000 in Bangalore, to say no to GATT, no to free trade, no to patenting of seed. And Jose Lutzenberger, who used to be the environment minister of Brazil, had come down for one of these big rallies, and he's looking at this ocean of 500,000 peasants. And he says to me, Vandana, I now understand why they're doing what they're doing. This is the last freedom. The freedom of a farmer to work with the land and to produce food. That freedom is something they cannot tolerate. And that is the freedom that has to be destroyed. That is the freedom we have to defend. Now, I mentioned the other crop that is in our center of India, center of diversity, is what we call it the brinjal. It's called the eggplant aubergine. Monsanto in 2010 tried to push this on us. We started a campaign when the trial started. We said we won't eat this. And because food is so intimate to people, even the women on the street can talk about BT Bengan in India. So we did this for the children, so in every school they had everything about the GM transgénica. And I'd love to see stuff like this on the corn being prepared here for young children. Our government was forced to hold public hearings. 7 places public hearings were held. Everywhere, peasants, consumers, scientists said, we don't want this. We have a moratorium on the GM corn. No transgenic food crop has been allowed in India because of the movements. And I do hope transgenic maize will never make it to Mexico because of your movements. We are now having to prepare for another introduction of a transgenic in the center of diversity in India. India is the biggest producer of bananas in the world, but you don't see our bananas in the global market because our bananas are grown to be eaten locally. You know, they're very thin skins, they're delicate, different flavors. You go to Kerala, you go to Karnataka, small shops that sell tea or cigarettes have about 20 kinds of bananas hanging there. Everywhere there's diversity. And this mentality to destroy diversity, to destroy freedom, is now driving Mr. Bill Gates, who has now partnered with your Mr. Slim. They too have have a problem. You know, I think they all need to be sent to a mental asylum. Say, I will destroy diversity, I will poison food, I will take away the democratic rights of people. That has to be insanity. Anyway, Slim and Gates have joined for a global takeover, but Gates is pushing GM bananas. And the argument is they're going to save Indian women from dying in childbirth. Anemia is a major cause for childbirth death. But why do we have iron deficiency? Not because nature doesn't give us enough iron. Let me just read out to you. The iron in 100 grams of food, it's usually measured in milligrams per 100 grams. So amaranth has 11, moringa, an amazing iron-rich and vitamin A-rich, 28, buckwheat 15, neem, a tree which was patented and we defended it, it's 25, millet 8, Bengal gram leaves 23. Go on, cumin seeds 11. We dry up mango for a mango powder. And souring agents with vitamin C are very important because they help the absorption of iron. So you always have to have iron-rich foods with sour food. Lemon, tamarind, dry mango powder is 45. Turmeric has 67. How much does banana have? 0.44. Now, it's not that banana is not a good food. We call it the sacred fruit. And it seems that Alexander, when he came to India, he's called Alexander the Great, yeah? He's the first one to have seen bananas from the West. And he took this information and said there are people in India who just live on a diet of bananas. So interestingly, the scientific name of banana is Musa sapientum, the wise one, the food of the wise. And now the unwise say they're going to increase the iron content, the part that banana doesn't give you, that's what they want to increase. $15 million has been given by Gates to Mr. Dale, a University of Queensland scientist. So I started to research Mr. Dale. He knows one crop, the banana. He has done no work on iron content. An Indian scientist has done that work. So as I say, one rich man, one scientist who knows one crop, think they can replace the wealth of nature, thousands of crops and their diversity, millions of people over thousands of years, and replace all that intelligence with their stupidity and their ignorance. We can't allow it to happen. It is an ignorant and irresponsible. I need to know what that was. Bravo! It's in your hands. You're the one who has to do all this. When the children and the women lead this struggle and name these fellows as the capitalist patriarchs of our time, creating bioimperialism, then we will have moved to a new level. Because it is not just about technology. When I say it's ignorant, it's not just ignorant of the diversity. I would like to see any scientist who's working on transgenic corn to have a competition with an indigenous peasant on the diversity of corn, or on corn agroecosystems. They will fail every test because their world is shaped by the limits of what I call the Petri dish worldview. Yeah? You have the planet, you have a planetary worldview. In your field you see all that diversity. You have a worldview from the earth. At best they have the Petri dish worldview, where they know how to shoot a gene into the cell of a plant. They don't know anything more. They have no idea how that plant works. They have no idea what the different genes do. All they know is how to shoot, and they call it the micro-projectile bombardment. The scientific papers are published. The other thing that they use is a cancer, the agrobacterium. Both are instruments of war. I call it war at the genetic level, and they have no idea what's going on, which is why they must always add an antibiotic resistance marker to separate the cells that absorb the transgene from the cells that didn't, which means every transgenic food has antibiotic resistance. And then because the corn doesn't want a Bt toxin, it doesn't want a Roundup resistant gene, the corn rejects it. So they add promoters of virulent viruses to express in the crop that doesn't want that expression, this new toxic expression. So basically every transgenic crop is a bundle of toxic genes, bacteria and viruses, all because the technology is so inaccurate. And those who deal with it only know how to deal with the petri dish. Now, can we leave the future of this beautiful biodiverse planet in the petri dish worldview, or do we take it to the worldview of indigenous cosmovisions that realize the relationship of everything, that everything is connected, all of life is connected, that we don't live in a fragmented and separated world? Now, because they work with an obsolete science, it's a mechanistic science, life is not a machine, it's a reductionist science, things are not separated, things are connected. I did my PhD on the foundations of quantum theory, on a topic called non-locality and non-separability in quantum theory. Now, mechanistic physics tells you everything is separate. This pen is separate from this microphone, is separate from the corn. Quantum theory tells you everything is related. Everything is related. And because everything is related, the science of genetic engineering, assuming genes are little fragmented billiard balls which you can move around and nothing will happen, is an obsolete science. It's a primitive science. And that is why it's going so wrong. That is why when they put a toxic gene to control a pest, instead you get more pests. All of the Bt crops have created new generations of pests. In cotton, we never had aphids and jacids as pests. They've exploded. 13 times more pesticide is being used. The bollworm, which is supposed to be controlled by the Bt toxin, has now become resistant. So they're adding new genes of Bt. The same goes for the Roundup crops. Roundup-ready crops have created, because of the excessive application of glyphosate, they've created wheat that are resistant to Roundup. And now, the recommendation in the US is half of the farmlands of US are overtaken by superweeds which can't be controlled. And Monsanto gives $12 an acre to farmers to say, go buy Agent Orange, if Roundup isn't working. Agent Orange was a war chemical used during the Vietnam War. When I see them, one gene fails, they stack 2. 2 genes fail, they stack 3. They have now 8 stacks, and I'm told the applications they have made for Mexico are stacked genes with both Bt toxin and Roundup resistance. Einstein had given a very, very clear warning. He had said a clear sign of insanity is to keep doing the same thing again and again and again, expecting a different outcome. Another reason why they need treatment. Now, they say all this is for feeding people, but A, transgenic transformation doesn't change the yield of a crop. If a Bt is added to this corn, the corn's yield comes from what the peasants did, not from Monsanto's addition of a new gene. So you have a failure to yield. There hasn't been an increase. In India, in fact, they came in saying farmers will get 15 kilograms per acre. The average has been 450. Many times it has failed. This year, because of the drought, 40% cotton has failed in India with the Bt cotton. So much more risk for the farmers. But there's another reason why this is not about hunger. Basically, agriculture controlled by industry doesn't produce food for nourishment. Because an ancient Indian text called the Upanishad has said, everything is food. Everything is something else's food. And when we know that the web of life is a food web, we respect it. We do not put contaminants. We make sure we are not using pesticides. We make sure we are not allowing transgenics. But when agriculture becomes about commodity production, where the same companies make big money selling costly inputs, and then make even more money by buying cheap from farmers. So they will sell inputs that are 20 times more costly than the corn itself. And there's a total separation between costs of production and the price, because the governments bail them out. That's why the rich countries give $400 billion of subsidy, the issue in the entire WTO debate on agriculture. How can you keep subsidizing high-cost production and dumping it on the third world? This is what happened with NAFTA and corn. For Africa, it isn't that the corn produced in America was cheaper. It's just that it was made cheap with the huge subsidies. In cotton, $4 billion of subsidy were allowing the US to dump cotton on the world market. And they lost a case in the WTO against Brazil. In the case of soya, we did a huge movement because our oilseeds were being destroyed. $191 subsidy, the world price $150, which means it would have been more than $300 if the true price had been allowed to reflect, and our crops would not have been destroyed. 5 million farmers uprooted overnight because of dumping of soya, and 1 million small virgin oil mills shut down in order to create the market for their oil. So they're failing to increase yields, they're failing to control pests and weeds, and they're producing commodities that are not food. Nobody would want the transgenic food anyway. But only 10% of the corn and soya of the world goes into the human food chain, is eaten by humans directly. A majority of it is used for factory farms and animal feed. Even in India, where Monsanto can't introduce a GM corn, but they're trying to take over the corn market through hybrids first, 75%, we just did a survey, 75% of the corn being grown in India with Monsanto seeds is going for animal feed. When farmers grow their own corn, they eat it. When they grow a corn bought from these companies, they've got to sell the produce because they spend so much money on credit that they have to sell it to pay back the credit. So either you have suicide through debt or you have hunger through debt. Half of the hungry people of the world, 1 billion people are hungry. Half of them are producers of food. Why aren't they eating the food they grow? Because they're in debt. They have to sell everything they grow. That is why we need food sovereignty. And you can't have food sovereignty without seed sovereignty. Because seed is the first thing in the food chain. So they haven't, theirs is not a food system. It's a poison system. And not only should they not be here, because you hold the legacy and heritage of this amazing diversity of corn, they shouldn't be anywhere in the world because they have nothing good to offer. Nowhere should there be GMOs in the food system. So we've been, in India, I started Navdanya, which means 9 seeds. It also means the new gift. 1987, the moment I heard them talk about owning seed and forcing intellectual property rights and GMOs on countries of the world. We've created 110 community seed banks. So 9 seeds for diversity, but it also is the new gift of the commons. Because seed is the commons. Who can tell me how many communities worked to give you the corn today? It's a commons because of the ancestors who have shaped it. It's a commons because we must freely save it and exchange it. And it's a commons because we must hold it precious for handing over to future generations. So when these companies said, we've got to stop farmers from saving seed, I declared to our government and said, seed saving is not a crime, it's our highest duty to the earth, to our communities, and to the future. And we will not obey any law that prevents us from performing this duty. We call the non-cooperation with bad law, unjust law, brute law, satyagraha, following Gandhi. Satyagraha means the fight for truth. He first practiced it in South Africa when they were forcing division between the Indians, the blacks, the whites. And he said, we will not wear these badges. We are one as citizens, equal in our diversity. And then he practiced it to fight the compulsory cultivation of indigo. We used it to tell the government we will not obey laws that prevent us from saving seeds. More importantly, we used it in 2004 when Monsanto pushed through a new law called the seed law to criminalize seed diversity. And this is happening around the world. I was told by Anna that you have a 2007 seed law, which basically says you can't have exchange of seed without a labeling and an approval. That is compulsory registration. What are the standards for compulsory registration? Uniformity. Now, if a peasant goes with this and says, okay, I want to distribute this, I just want it recorded, immediately the standards of uniformity, which are called DUS, distinctiveness, uniformity, stability, they'll turn around and tell you, sorry, this is not uniform. Won't be approved. So this compulsory registration is the new tactics to destroy our diversity by criminalizing diversity and the farmers who protect diversity. The very important case, European Court of Justice ruled against the biggest seed saver in France called Cocopelli. And the ruling basically says, protecting, because one of the advisors to the court said, no, there's a duty to protect biodiversity because of the Convention on Biological Diversity. It's international law. The courts, obviously bribed by Monsanto, ruled and said, there's a superior objective of food security. And biodiversity can be destroyed if uniformity produces more. But the problem is uniformity does not produce more. Since I studied the Green Revolution in the 80s, I realized that uniform chemical monocultures produce less food per acre. They produce more commodity because they're only growing one thing. So if all you grow is wheat, you'll have more wheat. But if you grow some wheat, some chickpea, some mustard, you'll have mustard and chickpea and wheat, and you'll have the greens. Today, these greens are being killed because of the use of herbicides. That's why you have iron deficiency. And now they turn around and say, oh, we'll solve vitamin A problems with golden rice. We will solve iron deficiency with GM banana, increasing 0.44 to maybe 0.88, maybe 3 times. It'll still be 3,000% less efficient than our indigenous knowledge and our biodiversity. And that is why we have to protect our biodiversity. I remember, again, back at that rally of 500,000, when Lutzenberger is sitting next to me, and we are saying, you know, we have to show that the peasant farming produces more food. And he said something that has stayed in my mind and has guided a lot of the work we've done. He said, in the Chiapas, a typical peasant grows 10 tons of food. But that food is not just corn. Maybe 2 tons will be corn. The rest will be bananas and vegetables and beans and pumpkins and everything else that you need. But they use the fact that in the US with the monoculture they have 4 tons of corn per acre, and they said this produces less, but it was producing 10 tons of food. So what we've done is with our ecological systems, we've calculated in India, across farming systems, how much does a biodiverse agroecological system produce in food and nutrition. This report of ours, Health per Acre, shows that we could have enough food and nutrition for the world, and 2 times more, and 3 times more, by intensifying biodiversity intensifying knowledge, not ignorance, intensifying ecology, not chemicals, intensifying self-reliance, not capital inputs and debt. And that other intensification is what food sovereignty is all about. We started a global seed freedom campaign. We've also done a report. These are all available on the Navdanya website, Navdanya. 2 years ago, because they kept around talking about how they were performing miracles, we did a report from around the world. And this is the executive summary, but there's a much bigger report on the web page. And we couldn't find another title. We were going to say State of GMOs in the World. We said, no, it doesn't work. The GMO emperor has no clothes. And now we've launched a big global seed freedom campaign, Global Citizens Alliance, more than 120 groups, including SECM here on the corn. And what we've done in this is both create a common platform for people to tell a story about what their diversity is, what seeds they have saved, what their agriculture gives, but also tell the stories of resistance. The resistance to Monsanto, and its corruption, and its monopoly, and its new bioimperialism. Every year, now onwards, we are going to celebrate 2nd of October to 16th of October as the fortnight of seed freedom. Second, because it's Gandhi's birth anniversary and is recognized as the day where, as citizens for freedom, we have an obligation to not cooperate with unjust law. Either laws that force patenting of seed, laws that criminalize our seed saving, or laws that say you have to have GMOs. They are all laws that are worthy of non-cooperation. And therefore, only citizens can write another law. What is that other law? It's the law of the seed. Now, what's the nature of this seed? You take one kernel, and it's not just going to give you all of this, it's going to probably give you 20 corn heads. Look at the multiplication factor. No transgenic crop can give you that generosity and abundance. The second law of the seed is renewal. Good, fertile, living, open-pollinated seed longs to renew. Might be a rainfall failure, it might have to sit in the soil for 2 years. But when the rain comes, it's going to burst into life. So, multiplication, reproduction, renewability, and sharing. The corn tells the bee, come and pollinate me. I just had a letter for the transgenic banana campaign. The beekeepers of India have written to me. It says, the banana flour is the most important source of food and pollen for bees because it flowers all year round. So please, also, in the banana campaign, No to GMO banana campaign, please put the seed and the plant and the bee and that relationship into the picture. The law of the seed, we're writing this law of the seed as given by the seed, as given by our freedom, as given by democracy, as given by our ancestors, as given by the peasants. We'll be ready by the end of May, middle of May actually, and we're going to send it right away to all of you. And what we'd like to do is reclaim the kind of spirit through which we got independence against the first imperialism and those past colonizations. And that spirit basically says, we are free. We will be free. And we will not be forced to be bonded on your terms. So we would like to see this law of the seed translated in every community, that this is the law we will obey. In this area, there will be no transgenic corn, there will be no recognition of patents, only the recognition of the duty to protect biodiversity, the duty to love it, the duty to share it. And in this is not just a no to the transgenic, but is writing another narrative for the future of this planet, for the future of our diverse cultures, in which we work together across our diversities. Because when we are together, Monsanto has no power. It's only when we are divided that they have power, when we are divided geographically, or we are divided sectorally. But a bad corn is bad for the farmer and is bad for the consumer. A contaminated corn will contaminate the blood of the child and the mother, and this is a study done in Canada. So I would like to end my remarks with sharing a small poem that was sent to me by someone who's joined the Seed Freedom Campaign. And there's a major Sufi thinker philosopher from Iraq, and she said, I want to share this with you. And this, I know, is the message with which you are fighting transgenic corn in Mexico. In this earth, in this immaculate field, we shall not plant any seeds except for compassion, except for love.